There is someone who never expected to be paying attention to you again, yet somehow they keep finding themselves drawn to the person you are becoming. It did not happen all at once. It started with small observations. A glimpse here, an update there, a moment that seemed insignificant at first. But with each passing observation, something inside them began to shift. The version of you they carried in their mind no longer matched the person standing before them now. And the more they noticed that difference, the harder it became to look away. For a long time they assumed they already knew your story. They believed they understood your strengths, your weaknesses, your habits, and the direction your life would take. In their mind, the image of who you were remained frozen in time. But recently, they have been confronted with a reality they never saw coming. You have changed. Not in a superficial way, not in a way that can be measured by appearances alone. There is something different about your energy, a quiet confidence, a deeper sense of self, a strength that seems to come from lessons learned rather than words spoken. And what surprises them most is that this transformation happened without them. As they watch from a distance, they find themselves becoming increasingly curious. They wonder what experiences shaped this version of you. They wonder what challenges you faced when nobody was watching. They wonder how many obstacles you overcame to become the person they see today. Questions that never existed before are now occupying their thoughts. Questions they cannot easily answer, and listen to this. What began as curiosity is slowly becoming something much deeper, because every time they notice another sign of your growth, they are reminded of something uncomfortable. They are reminded that life continued moving forward without them being part of the journey. And for the first time, they are starting to wonder just how much they may have underestimated you, and whether the opportunity they once had is beginning to look very different than it did before. And listen to this, because the more this person observes your growth, the more they realize how much they never truly understood about you. At first, they thought they were simply noticing changes. They saw signs of progress, signs of confidence, signs that life had continued moving forward in positive ways. But what started as simple observation quickly turned into something much more personal. The more they paid attention, the more questions began forming in their mind. Questions they never expected to ask. Recently, they have found themselves comparing the person they remember with the person you have become, and the difference has been impossible for them to ignore. They remember a version of you that existed during a different chapter of life, a version shaped by different circumstances, different challenges, and different experiences. But now, when they look at you, they see someone who carries themselves differently. There is a sense of self-assurance that was not always visible before. There is a calmness that comes from growth, a quiet strength that cannot be faked because it was earned through experience. And every time they notice it, they find themselves wondering what happened during all the moments they were not there to witness. What surprises them most is how often these thoughts return. They do not actively search for reasons to think about you. Yet somehow, their curiosity keeps pulling them back. They wonder what lessons shaped you. They wonder what obstacles forced you to grow. They wonder what moments changed your perspective and helped you become who you are today. The strange thing is that they are no longer focused on the past version of you. Their attention has shifted entirely toward understanding the person standing before them now. And listen to this. The deeper they reflect, the more they begin questioning assumptions they once considered facts. There was a time when they thought they had you figured out. They believed they understood your limits. They believed they understood your potential. They believed they knew exactly who you were. But now they are beginning to realize how incomplete that understanding may have been. Because growth has a way of revealing dimensions of a person that others never expected to see. And lately, every new thing they notice about you seems to challenge something they once believed. There have even been moments when they caught themselves feeling a sense of admiration they did not anticipate. Not because of any single accomplishment or visible success, but because of the energy you now carry. They can sense resilience, They can sense wisdom that comes from experience. They can sense that you have spent time building yourself in ways that most people never see. And perhaps what affects them most is realizing that you did all of this without needing anyone's approval. You continued evolving, whether people were paying attention or not. As these realizations continue growing, another thought has started entering their mind. A thought that makes them more uncomfortable than they would like to admit. What if they never truly saw your value when they had the chance? What if they were looking at only a small part of who you were while ignoring everything you were capable of becoming? That question has become difficult to escape because the more they watch your growth, the more they realize that the person they thought they knew may have been only the beginning of the story. And as that realization settles deeper into their heart, they are starting to see you through completely different eyes. Eyes that are finally recognizing something they may have overlooked for far too long. And listen to this, because something unexpected is beginning to happen inside the person who has been quietly watching your growth. What started as curiosity is slowly turning into reflection, and reflection is beginning to reveal emotions they never anticipated. For a long time, it was easy for them to look at the past and believe they had made peace with it. They convinced themselves that certain opportunities belonged to another chapter of life. They assumed that whatever happened was simply part of the journey and that there was nothing left to think about. But now, every time they see another sign of how much you have evolved, they find themselves questioning conclusions they once felt certain about. The truth is that your growth has forced them to revisit old memories from a completely different perspective. Moments that once seemed ordinary now appear far more meaningful. Conversations they barely thought about now carry a different weight. Certain choices they made in the past suddenly feel more significant than they did before. It is not because the past itself has changed. It is because they have changed. And through that change, they are beginning to see things they could not see at the time. Lately, a question has been appearing in their mind more often than they would like to admit. What if I walked away before fully understanding what was in front of me? At first, they tried to dismiss that thought. They told themselves there was no point revisiting old possibilities. They told themselves everyone looks back occasionally and wonders about roads not taken. But this feels different. The feeling keeps returning. The more they observe the person you have become, the more difficult it becomes to ignore. And listen to this. One of the most surprising parts of this experience is that they are not simply admiring who you are today. They are beginning to recognize qualities that were always there. Qualities they may have overlooked, underestimated, or failed to fully appreciate. Your strength did not appear overnight. Your resilience did not suddenly arrive. The potential they now see so clearly may have been present all along. The difference is that they are finally paying attention in a way they never did before. This realization has created a sense of regret that catches them off guard. Not necessarily regret about specific events, but regret about perception. Regret about not seeing the bigger picture sooner. Regret about making assumptions instead of looking deeper. There have been moments recently when they found themselves wondering how differently they might have viewed the connection if they possessed the understanding they have now. It is a thought that arrives quietly, but leaves a lasting impact every time it appears. What makes this so emotional is that they can no longer separate your growth from their own reflection. Every achievement they notice, every sign of confidence they observe, every glimpse of the person you have become acts like a mirror. It forces them to examine their own decisions. It forces them to confront possibilities they once ignored. And perhaps most importantly, it forces them to ask whether they truly recognized your value when they had the chance. Now they find themselves standing in unfamiliar emotional territory. They are no longer simply watching your growth. They are measuring it against opportunities that may have slipped away. And the more they think about it, the more one question begins rising above all the others. What if the connection they once viewed so casually was far more important than they realized? Because the person they see today is making it harder and harder to believe that they understood the full significance of what they once had. And as that realization grows stronger, they are beginning to wonder whether some opportunities are gone forever, or whether certain doors might still be waiting to be opened. And listen to this, because the question that has been quietly growing inside them is no longer easy to ignore. For a while, they were able to keep these thoughts at a distance. They could observe your growth, admire your transformation, and then return to their own life without thinking too deeply about what it all meant. But that has started to change. What once felt like casual curiosity has become something much more personal. Every time they see another example of your confidence, your independence, or the life you are building, the same question keeps finding its way back into their mind. Do I still have a place in their world? At first, they tried to dismiss that thought as wishful thinking. After all, a lot of time may have passed. A lot has changed. The version of you they once knew is not the same person standing before them today. That realization alone creates uncertainty. They know growth changes people. They know experiences reshape priorities. They know life has a way of taking people in directions nobody can predict. And because of that, they find themselves wondering whether they would even recognize their place in your life anymore. What makes this situation so difficult is that they are caught between two opposing emotions. On one side is doubt. Doubt reminds them of the distance that exists. Doubt reminds them of missed opportunities, old decisions, and everything that was left unsaid. It tells them that too much time has passed. It tells them that the chapter has already closed. It tells them they should simply accept the situation and continue moving forward. For a while they listened to that voice because it felt safer, but there is another voice growing stronger every day, a voice driven by hope rather than fear, a voice that keeps asking questions doubt cannot answer. What if things are not as final as they seem? What if growth has changed both of you in ways that create new possibilities rather than eliminating old ones? What if the person you have become would see things differently now? These questions linger because they refuse to disappear. The more they try to silence them, the louder they seem to become. And listen to this. The reason these thoughts have become so powerful is because your growth has forced them to confront something they were not expecting. They are realizing that they still care. Perhaps not in the exact way they once did. Perhaps not through the same lens they viewed the connection years ago. But the emotional investment remains. Otherwise, they would not be thinking about it this much. They would not be questioning possibilities. They would not be wondering whether the door is truly closed. The fact that these questions continue surfacing tells them something important about their feelings. Recently, they have caught themselves imagining scenarios they never used to consider. They imagine reaching out. They imagine a conversation. They imagine discovering who you are now, beyond the glimpses they have been observing from afar. Yet every time these thoughts appear, uncertainty follows close behind. Would you welcome it? Would you even want to hear from them? Would the connection still feel familiar, or has too much changed? These are the questions they carry with them every day. Now they find themselves standing between fear and possibility. Fear tells them to stay where they are, safely observing from a distance. Possibility invites them to find out what they do not know. And the more they watch your life continue unfolding, the harder it becomes to remain passive. Because deep down, they are starting to realize that the real question is no longer whether you have changed. They already know you have. The question keeping them awake now is whether they have waited too long to discover if there is still a chance for them to be part of your story. And listen to this, because after all the observation, all the reflection, and all the questions they have been asking themselves, this person is finally arriving at a truth they can no longer avoid. For a long time, they convinced themselves that watching from a distance was enough. They told themselves that seeing your growth was simply inspiring. They told themselves that their curiosity was harmless. But lately, they have begun to understand that what they are feeling goes much deeper than curiosity. If it were only curiosity, it would have faded. If it were only nostalgia, it would have passed. Instead, every new glimpse of the person you have become seems to strengthen something inside them rather than weaken it. What they are starting to realize is that they were never just watching your growth. They were measuring it against their own memories, their own choices, and their own understanding of what happened between you. Every sign of confidence they see in you forces them to think about who you were when they knew you. Every sign of happiness makes them wonder about the journey that brought you there. And every sign of strength reminds them that there were qualities within you they may not have fully appreciated at the time. This realization has changed the way they see everything, and listen to this. One of the biggest surprises for them has been discovering how much they still care about the answer to a question they never expected to ask. That question is simple, yet it carries enormous weight. Do I still have a chance? Not necessarily a chance to recreate the past. Not a chance to return to old versions of yourselves, but a chance to be part of the future. A chance to discover what might happen if two people who have both grown and changed were to meet again with completely different levels of understanding. The reason this question feels so important is because they can no longer deny the emotional impact your growth has had on them. Watching you evolve has forced them to confront feelings they thought were settled. It has forced them to acknowledge admiration they never expressed. It has forced them to admit that the connection meant more than they allowed themselves to recognize. And once a person reaches that level of honesty, remaining emotionally detached becomes nearly impossible. There have been moments recently when they imagined what it would feel like to stop wondering, to stop observing from a distance and finally seek clarity. They imagine what they would say. They imagine how the conversation might unfold. They imagine discovering whether the person they see today still remembers the connection in the same way. Yet alongside those hopes comes uncertainty, because hope always carries risk. Hope requires vulnerability. Hope asks people to step beyond the safety of assumptions and face reality directly. What makes this moment so significant is that they are beginning to understand something profound. The reason they keep thinking about whether they still have a chance is because part of them believes the possibility still exists. If they truly believed the door was closed forever, they would not be questioning it. They would not be reflecting this deeply. They would not be wondering what could happen. The very existence of these thoughts reveals something important. It reveals that their feelings have not disappeared. It reveals that your growth has awakened something they can no longer ignore. Now they stand at a crossroads between observation and action. For so long, they have been a silent witness to your transformation. They have watched you become stronger, wiser, and more confident. But somewhere along the way, their focus shifted. They stopped asking how much you had changed and started asking how much they still cared. And after everything they have realized, one truth continues rising above all the others. The question is no longer whether you have grown. The question is whether they are brave enough to discover if there is still room for them in the life you have worked so hard to build. Because sometimes the hardest part is not recognizing what you lost. Sometimes the hardest part is finding the courage to discover whether the opportunity still exists.